Today we are starting with a standing spine segmentation, or you can kind of call this a Jefferson curl. But option to progress this exercise with some load. I have a 15-pound kettlebell here, but you could also use a dumbbell. If you just have one dumbbell around, a dumbbell will also work for this if you would like to load. So hips will be, our legs will be about hips width apart. And as you're going through this roll down, this variation is more so focused on articulating spine flexion. So we're trying to get as much movement in each vertebrae and flexion, rounding the back as we start to go down and then also roll back up. Keeping your hands close to your thighs and legs, you're going to start to tuck your chin to chest. And just notice that I don't immediately start to hinge my pelvis forward, but I want to keep my pelvis underneath me as I start to round into my upper back. If you do this very well, you should start to feel stretch along the spine. Keeping those hips underneath your pelvis for as long as you can as you start to roll down. You can slightly start to bend the knees if you need to. I like to keep my hands close to my legs so that I can keep this more in the spine, feeling the stretch there, instead of focusing on stretch in the hamstrings or hips. As you start to come up, you're just trailing your fingertips up, and then immediately I'm starting to bring my pelvis right underneath my ribs, restacking the spine vertebrae by vertebrae. This will be a timed drill for 2 minutes. We will do this exercise. If you would like to keep a weight around in case you decide to start to load it, go ahead and go for it. I will be loading this exercise, but just know that it's totally optional. Tucking your chin to chest. So I encourage you, as you are going through this segmentation, to chase for the sensation of where you feel things. You should be feeling stretch in your spine as you go through this. If you're holding weight, you will obviously feel a loaded stretch along the spine in this position. We want to keep the load in the spine and not necessarily turn this into a hinge pattern. This is more of a Jefferson curl. So we are breaking the rules of a deadlift. I want you to round your back as you start to go down. If you have a very tight mid and lower spine, I would suggest slightly bending your knees as you get lower to the bottom so that you can keep that sensation once again in your spine and not load so much in the glutes and hamstrings. We're chasing sensation and not necessarily range of motion here. I'm sorry that Charles has entered the chat. I'm about to put him up very shortly. And that has been 2 minutes after you've finished your last rep. You'll put your weight down if you used a weight. Come here, Charles. Oh. And we are going to move on to a scapular car. So this is focused on the shoulder blades. Option to sit if you need to, but I'll be doing this standing since we're kind of already standing. Arms are going to be straight ahead. I'll show a few different angles just so you can see what is moving. But we will do 6 reps here. We'll do 3 in one direction and then reverse. Scapular CARs. So since this is focused on scapular movement, shoulder blades, we want to do our best to disassociate spine here. Spine is usually what will hop into the mix to help move your shoulder blades. Try not to do that. So first we are going to go into scapular elevation, lifting your shoulder blades up. We squeeze them towards the midline, press them down the ribs, and then spread them away. I'm just going to turn so you can actually see my shoulder blades. Lift, squeeze, depress, protract. One more. Lift, squeeze, depress, protract. We're going to reverse this. You're going to squeeze, depress, protract, lift. Again, watch out for spine going into extension. Squeeze, depress, protract, lift. You should feel a little bit of burn here at this point. Squeeze, depress, protract, lift. Wonderful. So that's our 6 reps. As you're going through those, watch out for bent elbows. So your elbows trying to move your scapulas or even the spine. Lock the elbows out, engage your core to stabilize that spine so you can really maximize movement happening at the shoulder blades and not at our other joints. Okay, coming down to the mat for our third exercise, getting into the hips, we'll be doing external rotation stretch. Coming to a 90-90 position. If you have a few blocks around, let's say if you are pretty flexible, hypermobile, and just need a little bit more to feel stretch, I would keep a block around. Also, if you have tight hips, you could also put a block underneath your hips here. But we'll be working on the front leg. Knee is right in line with the bony part of your hip. To get the best out of this external rotation stretch, we have to position our pelvis more anteriorly. So hands will come to the pelvis just so you know it's moving. You're going to tilt your pelvis forward. I like to visualize literally pulling my belly button towards my knee. I'm a pretty flexible person, so already I feel stretched just by positioning my pelvis in anterior tilt. If you need more than that, that's when you can start to walk your hands further away from you. We'll be in this stretch for 2 minutes. Go ahead and set your timer. I have mine going for 2 minutes. We'll be doing some diaphragmatic breathing while we're in this stretch. Stretching should be very exploratory. So anytime you're stretching, the point of stretching is not to try to bend and put yourself into positions to look like someone else, but to find the stretch in your body, because you might not look how I look in the stretch. Your body might need to be positioned in a different way to feel what stretch we're searching for. So that could look like just moving your hands around, shifting your torso in different angles, directions, whatever you need to search for the tissues that feel tight for you. As time starts to go, you'll start to feel the space open and maybe you can start to get deeper in the stretch, but make sure you feel it in the outside of the right hip. We'll take a few breaths here in this position. With each exhale, maybe you start to sink deeper into your stretch. Maybe things start to loosen up a little bit, or maybe you just become a little bit more comfortable being in the position you placed yourself in. Alrighty, that's 2 minutes. We're gonna hop right into our next exercise and then do this stretch and then the other exercise on our other leg. This is a external rotation kinetic stretch. So kinetic stretch means to create contraction on the lengthened tissues and also the shortened tissues. So you'll be contracting the lengthened tissues, which is the stuff you were just stretching. That's all of your outer hip outside of the right hip. Your shortened tissues will be on the opposite end. So that's your inner thigh, hip flexor, all this stuff here. I will show the most supportive version and then I'll start to kind of progress this exercise. But your hands will be on the floor, going into that stretch kind of like you originally did. You're going to think about pulling your belly button towards your knee. Since this is a kinetic stretch and we are trying to contract tissues, you are going to contract your inner thigh hip flexor and literally think, pull your belly to your thigh. You should feel your inner thigh really light up and work here. When you get to the basement of that stretch, you're going to switch it to contract your outer thigh. So I'm driving my hip, my leg down into the ground to get me up into this upright position. Yes, again, pulling that inner thigh towards your belly, contracting your inner thigh hip flexor muscles. And then once again, driving this leg down into the ground. I'm not using my back into extension to lift me up. I'm driving this leg. I feel a lot of outer glute, outer hip to get me there. Yes, we have one more set. Pulling that belly button towards your knee. You can always bring your hands down for a little support if you need to. And then driving it out. Perfect. So we're going to go to the other side. You can just do a nice little windshield wiper here. Getting to the left leg, we have our external rotation stretch. We'll be here for 2 minutes. God. Okay. 2 minutes is going. Make sure the knee is right in line with the front of your hip. Once again, pelvis is going to tilt forward to lengthen all the back side of that hip, your hamstring, your glute. That way you'll get a really great stretch here without having to round yourself forward. So if you can get a nice anterior pelvic tilt here, go ahead and do that. I wanted to show you an option to also what can increase the stretch. You can bring your foot onto a block like so. This is for my really bendy people. Just a nice additional add-on to really get into that outer hip. Definitely don't force anything if you cannot even keep a neutral spine, or if your pelvis is not able to move with this block. I would not use the block at all. I would just focus on finding some pelvic tilt in this stretch and just chasing that sensation of stretch in the back of your left hip. We'll be here for about 40 more seconds. Anytime we're doing long stretches like this, always go back to your breath. Your nervous system is your second brain. If your nervous system can't be relaxed in this position, you can't be relaxed in this position. So exhales, try to make them 6 to 8 seconds long. Slow, effortless inhales in through the nose. And exhale. All right, that is our 2-minute stretch. You'll remove your block, and then we'll get into that kinetic stretch. So this is when we contract the shortened tissues and then also the lengthened tissues, which is what we currently were stretching. Option to always bring your hands down to the floor for support if you need that. So first we are literally pulling ourselves in towards our thigh, trying to make that connection of inner thigh contraction. Maybe a little bit of hip flexor on your exhale. Can you contract the back of your leg where you just felt that stretch? Good. 4 more. Remember, we're chasing sensation, not necessarily the range of motion. So if you're doing this very well, can you actually feel your inner thigh muscles as you pull your tummy towards your leg? And then on the opposite end, can you feel your outer hip muscles pressing that floor away to help you up? 2 more, pulling that belly towards the thigh. And then exhale, press it away. Perfect. So now we'll move on to our last stretch, which is a isometric movement pathway. All right, guys, we are on to our last exercise. This will be a movement pathway from bear position to 90-90. So to get to your bear position, I like to start in a butterfly. You'll take your right leg out to the side and then your left leg out to the side. Generally, if your knee is in line with your hip, you're in a good place. If you are very tight in the hips, you can kind of open up the space and move your knees slightly away. So from your bear position, we are going to start to take the right knee in towards the mat. My hands are right behind me for additional support. You can take them as far back as you need to for you and your hips. But keeping tension in this right hip, I'm going to flex my right ankle. I'm going to bring this right leg into internal rotation until my pelvis has to come off of the floor. And now I'm in my 90-90 position. We'll do this again to reverse out of it. You're going into external rotation, and now you're in your bear pose. So this is quite a bit of rotation of the thigh bone in the hip capsule. So really be intentional about that, trying to get as much rotation as you can, and then the pelvis can start to adjust to move you into this 90-90 position. If you would like to remove your hand support and challenge and load yourself a little bit more, you can reach your arms forward. Remember, we are trying to maximize the tension throughout the movement pathway. So we don't just want to passively move our legs in and out. That requires zero to little effort. We want to be intentional by engaging our outer hip as this leg goes out. And then on the flip side, our inner thigh muscles to bring us in. Remember, you can always bring your hands down to the floor for support. Opening, find that rotation, placing that leg down, find that external rotation, trying to keep tension in those hips, bringing that leg in. Have one more on the other side, opening. Ooh, it's very tricky with no hands. And back in. For this exercise, I would do about 8 to 10 reps, or I love a time drill. So you could also just set your timer for 2 minutes and not necessarily worry about how many reps you do, but how many quality reps you can do within those 2 minutes.